Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the Serious Strategy Gamer, and I want to do a little tutorial series for Rule the Waves 2. Rule the Waves 2 is a ship design and naval warfare game that simulates the first half of the 20th century, so that's very lovely, but it is a little bit hard to get into, so I want to ease that transition a little bit and give you an overview. We are going to do a couple of series. This one in particular is going to be about ship design. Ship design is one of the core aspects of the game. So let's set up a new game over here. We are going to go ahead with the 1900 start, so the most that we can get. And we're going to start with France. There's no particular reason why we are choosing France, but it's only for illustrative purposes. But it's a very nice and average nation, I would say. So you don't need to be concerned with too many things. So once you start, you can see you have a couple of different things. We're not going to be worried with that too much. And we're simply going to start over here with by picking any game slot where we do want to put our saves. This is my current Let's Play, so I don't want to see that. And we are going to go for a manual build of the legacy fleet, because that will allow us to design a couple of things, and that's going to be fine. We're going to go with all of this as is, so no big things over there. And we are immediately asked to build an existing fleet. So this is the main screen of the game, and we can go to the ship design tab over here. Now, this is the most exciting screen of the game. It has a lot of numbers, and you can tweak these, and it's really intriguing, but you can easily get lost in this. So let's talk a little bit about this interface first. So firstly, the first time you open it, it's probably going to look like this. I heavily encourage you to just expand this a little bit over here, and that should be fine. So the way that this works is there are several areas several areas to this screen. The first one is over here. This is what is concerning with the game variables. So you can pick the ship type. That has some implication of how the game is going to use your ship. You can enter a name. You actually have to enter a name, but you can also have someone suggested to you. These areas here are a little bit irrelevant. You can ask whether it's going to build at home or abroad. Mostly you're going to be using this at home, and that's pretty much it. You also have the ability to clear all of the values. This is a little bit of an accident. And you can use different things over here. Most important are these ones. You can auto-design a ship. So once you've picked a class, you can ask the game to automatically design a ship for you. You can check the design. I encourage you to use that heavily, and you can save the design and then start to build it. Right, before you do that, obviously you have to define some of the other parameters. This area, so we're going to go ahead and explain these areas first and then go into the depths later on via some examples. So first of all, here is the basic things about the ship. So the basic things about the hull, the displacement, so how large or small the ship is. You can see once we dial this down, it should become much smaller. It doesn't. Anyway, how fast it should go, so the engine, this is pretty much all dealing with that. Then this area down here is dealing with the armor, so how much metal we are putting on our ship to protect it from enemy interference. The torpedo defenses, the armor scheme, so how we want our armor to be set up. These are a lot of numbers. We're going to go into them in more detail later on. In principle, you've got the belt armor, so that's the side armor. The deck armor, so that's the top of the ship, and then you have the conning tower, so the bridge, the turrets, the weaponry, and so on. Right, over here, this next bit of the screen is relatively irrelevant. This is only graphical. This has no great game implications whatsoever, so you can pretty much ignore this. And then on the right, we have the weapons information, so the main weapons, the secondary weapons, and the tertiary weapons. Not all ships will have each of those. Sometimes you're only going to have main weapons, sometimes you're going to have staggered main, secondary and tertiary guns. And then we have additional stuff over here, primarily torpedoes, anti-aircraft weapons, mine warfare, anti-submarine warfare, and flight installations, so catapults, aircraft, all of this. Not all of that is going to be available at the start of the game, but that is pretty much it. Now the important thing to realize are these two columns over here. So over here you've got a column showing the weight of each individual segment. So the hull itself, let's say a hull of 2,000 tons, the hull itself can carry 2,000 tons. So this is how much weight you can put off the ship and it will still be afloat. And the weight of the hull itself, so of the steel construction that keeps everything afloat, is 600 tons. Also, the engine, currently rated at 18 knots, would have a weight of 150 tons. There's nothing else, there's no main guns, there's no armament, so all of these are 0. Then we only have... How do we have this? I don't think there should be anything over here. This is just some glitch. We have some accommodation space, so space where the crew lives. That is 70 tons, and that gives us a total of 900 tons. So for a ship that can carry 2,000 tons, we're only using 900. That does leave some weight remaining, about 1,100 tons. And it would take 27 months to build this ship, and it would cost 100 per turn, because over here you can also see the breakdown of the costs. 1.5 million for the hull itself, 500,000 for the engine, a little bit for this, a little bit for that. So that comes down to 2.9 million in total. Over 27 months, that is 106 per turn. So that's the basic interface that you've got. And when you design a ship, you always want to be looking down here in this area, because you want to have this weight remaining pretty much more or less down to 0. Usually it's a good idea to have a small positive amount so you can fit in some changes later on. But yeah, you basically want to use all of the displacement that you've got, or close to using it all. And once this turns red and negative, you know that you've overbuilt your ship. It's okay to slightly overbuild it, but usually it's a good idea to keep some room and flotation ready. So, that being said, I think it's a good idea to start some designs of ships and see what we can do and how this all comes together by using some practical examples for various smaller ship types. So, I'm very much looking forward to that. So, the first ship that we want to build is a destroyer. Now, the way you want to go about this is you want to define to yourself what is the mission profile that your ship has to fulfill. So what is it that you're building this ship for? Historically, destroyers did go through various iterations of what they were supposed to do. In this period, so in about 1900, their main job was actually to be a very fast, inexpensive ship that could bring torpedoes onto enemy battleships. So torpedoes were a kind of the cheap weapon, but could do devastating amounts of damage against even heavily armored ships. You needed to be quite fast and somewhat disposable. So these are a little bit swarm tactics. If you want to think about this in terms of maybe a historical army, these are a little bit more skirmishes, although they are capable of doing very heavy damage. So the first thing that you want to do then is go ahead and pick destroyer over here, and we want to build around this design. So first thing is 5,000 tons. That's pretty big actually, so we're going to dial this down dramatically. So I think we're going to start over here with a 500 ton ship, so very small, and as we said, it's supposed to be very fast, so we can dial up the speed here. I think 24 knots in the beginning of the game is a fairly good choice. Now there are various other choices here that you can make. First of all is freeboard. You can use normal freeboard, so basically a normal ship, or low freeboard, which means it sits a little bit lower in the water. The advantage of that is it will save some weight. The disadvantage, however, is that it will be more susceptible to bad weather. And since we are mostly as France operating in, let's say, the Atlantic and North Sea, I think normal freeboard is what we want. You also have a chance to design the range and the engine priority and the fuel type. So range, this means how easily your ship will be moving around strategic areas. Now we want to build this as mostly something that protects our home areas. So it would actually be fine to use a short range over here, and you can see that saves some weight, right? So the medium range has a weight of 193 tons, and the short range is saving a little bit of fuel, so you're not stockpiling quite as much fuel on the ship. And that should be fine, so that will save us some weight. Also in terms of engine priority, we can pick either normal, or some engine built for speed or reliability. Now since these things are supposed to be very fast, this is a little bit confusing because this is just how the engine is built. If we are building a very fast one, that means basically you're saving some weight on the engine, but it's more susceptible to damage. If you're building a very reliable one, the machinery gets more weighty, so heavier, for the same speed. But ultimately we will be able to achieve a speed of 24 knots. So we are going to go for a very lightweight engine, I would actually call it, for this speed type. Fuel type, you can pick coal. Later on also oil and diesel are options. For now we're going to pick coal, and that's going to be fine. So that already fulfills our requirements of a very fast craft and somewhat disposable. We could also include some armor on this, but I don't think that's really a good idea for a destroyer. Destroyers are supposed to be, they can't stand up against the main weapons of one of the main battleships anyway, so these are not going to be armored. They mostly rely on their speed. They're going to come in and out, just like skirmishes should be. So in that regard, we will leave all of this at 0. We're also not going to include any torpedo defenses. The main defense of this is going to be to run fast. However, we can go ahead here and on accommodation, either pick normal one, which means the crew has some quarters to live on board. That would take about 29 tons. We're going to pick crammed here. That saves us 8 tons. And that basically means that there are only very cramped accommodations on board. Sailors are mostly supposed to sleep on shore, and these are only going to venture out for specific actions. And I think that's an overall very good design. We could also pick colonial service. That would add 50 tons to it, but and basically allow us to put it on foreign station and gain some points from that. For destroyer, that's really not required. I think it's perfectly fine like this. Now, this ship, of course, would not be able to do much. We don't have any guns, we don't have anything else, and we said it's supposed to be mainly a torpedo carrier. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to add torpedo mounts. This brings up a new window where you can pick what you want. Now, there are two broad categories, either submerged torpedo tubes, so these are built into the hull of the ship, or swivel mounts. So these are on top of the superstructure, and then you can point them in various different directions and fire off the torpedoes in various different directions. I think these are much better compared to the submerged ones. You can't launch torpedoes on a submerged vessel at any speed, so you'd have to slow down a little bit, and you only can fire at certain angles. So overall, I think the swivel mounts are the much better choice. And you can pick various different combinations over here. The important one is whether you have a centerline swivel mount, so that's on the middle of the ship and it can fire to each direction, only possible on very small ships, or if you have a starboard, so right side, or port, left side of the ship super mount. So if we add one of these, let's say the K position, that is this position up here, so we have a torpedo mount up here. We can actually check the design over here, and it will give us various error messages. So first of all, it needs a name, yes. Ship is overgunned. There will be a negative replacement because we have 8-inch guns. That's only an artifact for now. And it gives us an error message because the torpedo mounts are not balanced. So that means we have to pick another one. And the other position for K is J. So these are next to each other and should have gotten at least rid of that one error message. We're going to add a couple of more things over here. So not the center line, but all the other ones basically I think should be fine. So we are going to add a lot of torpedo tubes on either side of the ship. So that is pretty fine. We're also going to add a couple of main guns. They can be some smaller caliber. So you can pick the caliber over here from anything from 2 to 20 caliber 20-inch guns. You can see there's a quality data over here. I don't actually know. I think 5 means you can't build this gun with your current technology at all. -2 means it's a very poor quality. -1 means it's only a poor quality. Then we have sometime hopefully the 0, which means it's considered a normal quality gun, and sometimes you have a +1 that you can choose. So usually how you should go about this is you can pick something like a broad range. Let's say we would be fine with anything from, let's say, 2 to 5 inches maybe. And it's worthwhile to play around in this range and see whether there's any good or bad quality, and go for the good ones, of course. Since there's no particular concern over here, I think just caliber 3 inches are fine. And similarly, we are going to add a turret, so that's similar to the torpedo mounts. And we're going to get for the forward and the aft ones. So again, these are centerline ones. If there's a wing configuration, it means it's on the side of the ship. So, you know what? We can actually add all of those. And you can see it did add these little things over here. And this is the only time that this graphical representation actually comes in usefully. You can show the turret arcs. So you can see the forward turret has a turret arc that spans, let's say 270 degrees or so, and the aft one as well. But if we actually get rid of the aft one, you can see that these wing turrets only have a certain, they can basically only fire off to one side in, let's say, 120 degrees or so arc. So these are not quite as good as the forward or aft ones because they definitely have better firing arcs. So we are in fact going to remove these wing turrets and we're going to add back the aft position turret. So that should give us a nice view on the battle, on the destroyer. It can fire a gun to the front, it can fire a gun to the rear, and it can fire both of these guns towards the side, and it can fire 4 torpedoes to each side. So that's pretty fine. The other things for a gun that you might want to do is we can increase or decrease the amounts of rounds per gun that it does carry. We have some ammo left and we have some weight remaining here. So let's add a couple of those. And that should give us a good firing solution. We also have fire control, so basically how well or how the fire of these things is controlled. Right now we can only pick local, and we're going to add 1 firing position for that. Basically that's meaningless, but it means there's 1 position to control these guns. Typically on larger ships you want to increase that a little bit. Various other options here that will only become available through time. The most important one might be cross-deck fire. That allows some of your guns to fire onto the other side, so across the deck. For now that's important, not meaningful for the destroyer. Secondary guns, we're not going to use any secondary guns, we're only using this. So we are not going to use any tertiary guns either. Any of this here is unimportant for now. In 1900 we don't really have to care about aircraft. We're not carrying any mines, nor anti-submarine warfare capabilities. We're not going to carry any aircraft ourselves. So this is already a fairly good ship. Let's check whether it's legal. We're going to pick a name over here. We're going to pick a suggested name. And we get a couple of notes. So we are being told that the ammo allowance for the main guns, so for these here, are on the low side by 120 rounds per gun. I'm fine with this, and since this is not only a note and not an error, it means the design might still be legal. We're also being told that this ship has cramped accommodation. That's this option over here. We know this, and it has short range. So this is fairly fine, and I'm very happy about this ship. But notice that it has some weight remaining. So it has a displacement of 500 tons, but there are 28 tons remaining. So that's pretty good for us. It means there's some flotation room left, but we could actually think about dialing down on the displacement over here, on the overall displacement, and see whether it would still be legal. In this case it would not be, but the cost would go down, so that is something that we might want to consider. But overall, you know what, I think I'm fine with a 500 ton displacement ship. So that's fine. We're going to save this and call it a day, and that is fine. Again, we are being told about any of that, and then we can save it and we can go to the build dialog, and in that case you can build a number of these ships. It tells you about the ships, the individual cost for the ships and the total funds that you have and the future maintenance cost. I think about 10, let's say 12 of those would be fine. That wouldn't cost us too much. It's only a fraction of our overall funding, and you can see all of them appearing over here, and that's pretty lovely. So, that being said, having designed these destroyers, let's look at the new design for a light cruiser. So again, let's think about the role of this thing. So in general, with all of these destroyers around, you want a ship that, well, firstly protects you against these destroyers, so is capable of doing some damage against these guys coming at you with their torpedo tubes. But you also want to have a fleet scout, so this is a little bit of a mixed thing. So it should be strong enough to venture ahead and have a look around. So it must be a little bit speedy, but maybe not quite as speedy as these destroyers. It's also more of an integral part for your main fleet, so maybe it's not quite as important. So it's more important to keep it some staying power. Right, so it shouldn't be driven off. It should be definitely easy to beat a destroyer. And so it's going to be a little bit larger. I think 3,000 tons is maybe okay. We are going to give it a little bit more speed. We can also pick a name over here. I don't really care about that. Let's say 21 knots. I think that's pretty okay for this time period. We should give it a medium range over here. So that settles the basic parameters for this. Now remember, our own destroyers had a caliber of 3 on their main guns, so let's look at the gun data for that. And you can see that the armor penetration table says even with a 3-inch gun you cannot penetrate anything, any armor whatsoever. You cannot penetrate that, but if we dial this up a little bit, maybe our enemies will have slightly better guns on their destroyers, so they would be able to penetrate about 1.4 inches of belt armor and nothing at all on the deck armor. So this is typical. It's mostly on short ranges you're using the belt armor, and at longer ranges you'd be using the deck armor. So 1.4. So we should try to get armor thickness that exceeds 1.4 at the very least. So let's do this on our belt over here. So on our belt, so at the main side of the ship, we're going to pick 1.5 belt armor. So the side of the ship is going to be protected a little bit more. We can also cover the extended belt, and let's do that with covering, I would say, at least 1-inch armor. So that helps out there. We can think about whether we want this strong part to be a little bit more narrow or whether we want it to be normal, so that shifts things around a bit, but I think this would be fine. Deck armor, we wouldn't need anything against these guns, but unfortunately the game will require us to pick some, and I'm not sure why the 0.5 option is in here, because this is considered illegal by the game in all circumstances. So we're going to pick a little bit of deck armor, and you can see the weight distribution of this, and actually the deck armor is taking most of the weight in this setup, so that's not quite as good. So we're not going to extend that deck armor. It's only going to be in the middle, not in the front and in the back. But that's okay, we don't need it anyway. We've got the conning tower, so that is basically the bridge. We're gonna arm that a little bit with 2.5 inches of armor. You can see it's relatively small compared to the other categories, and if you are being hit in the bridge and this is not armor, this is of course pretty bad. So that's it for the main armament of the ship itself. We can also arm the turrets and all of that, so let's talk about turrets. So the light cruiser is supposed to drive off and be able to stand its ground against these light destroyers. I think it's typically good to give it a little bit higher guns, let's say 6-inch shells or so. We could also think about whether 5-inch, if there was a better quality there. There isn't. Caliber 7, there's actually worse quality, so I think caliber 6 is actually a very fine choice for our light cruisers. 6-inch shells are typically, historically, the ones that are being handled by a single person, so you don't need 2 person for reloading, so I think caliber 6 is a very fine choice. We're going to add some turrets. We could add some forward and aft turrets. That'd be lovely, so we'd have a similar layout as in our guns over here, but we don't really need that. We could also think about increasing the number of guns in these turrets, so we now have slightly stronger turrets, but if we look at the design over here, we will be getting some notification that says that there's a note: turret A gain main guns armor less than 9-inch caliber in turrets without reliable training. So this is basically trying to tell us in a very convoluted way that we don't have the technology for this, and that will lead to a reduction in the rate of fire. So for now, for light cruisers, this is not a valid design, but it might be in the future, so as we research more stuff. So this is interesting, but we could also pick the 1 and 2 position over here. The game is telling us that we cannot combine A and 1 or 2, so we're going to drop the A over here, and that's legal now. So we have 2 guns side by side, and if we look at the turret arcs, so they only have a degree of fire of 180 each, but it does allow us to fire forward in a much more concentrated fashion. So right now only 1 gun can fire towards the rear, 2 can fire towards forwards. So yeah, we're gonna do the same here in the back, and again it's gonna tell us that J is illegal now, but this is a fairly fine choice, I believe. So you have 2 guns as chase guns, 2 guns as sort of a defense towards the rear, That very well fits towards a scout. We can also put some guns on the wings, let's say in J and H, I believe. No, these are slightly offset. And it should give us an error about this. Yeah, turrets are not balanced, so this is not legal. So let's get rid of H and add instead I. Ah, goddammit. Right, so yeah, let's do this again. It's typically the ones next to each other. So either these two, or these two. I think H and I should be the ones. Yeah, there we go. So that does mean that we have 3 turrets firing towards each side, and that'd be lovely. Now, these turrets right now are completely open guns, so they're not encased at all. It's usually a good idea to use some turret armament, and it's usually better to give this a little bit more weight than the belt itself. Also need to secure it on the top, but that's good. So now these guns are somewhat protected. A lot of errors over here. Oh, the first error actually is irrelevant. Error armor configuration. So over here you have this slight little button that tells you about the armor configuration. And right now we have a sloped deck, so that means the deck somewhat slopes behind the sides. That's not something that we have researched yet, so right now we have to use the protected cruiser way, and that error should have gone away. So we're being told that the fire control is not the best, that the ammo allowance is slightly low, and there is some unused displacement. So indeed there's a lot of unused weight, 270 tons on a 3,000 ton ship. So we are going to add some more things. That's going to be fine. Fire control. Over here we can use central range finders. So in a central position on the ship, they're going to try to establish the range, and they're basically going to tell the gunners, and that's going to be alright. We're going to add 2 fire control positions here, so that if one is taken out by fire, the other one might still work, and that's okay. We're also going to increase the number of rounds per gun, let's say to 150. That means 127 tons usage, so our rate remaining goes down here dramatically. And let's check this design. So it would be all okay. This is an okay ship. It's not the best, really, but it would already be considered okay. Now, I think it would be good to add some torpedo tubes. Again, we could try to do swivel mounts, but unfortunately at the start of the game you can only do submerged mounts. I still think it's a good idea to do this. Let's add 4 torpedo mounts, in fact. The reason for that is this allows you to fight off larger ships as well. So if you ever stumble upon a larger foe, this might help you to put some torpedoes in them and then run away, so that is certainly good. We have some weight remaining, and what we could do then is either we could dial down on the displacement. Right now this ship would cost about 11 million. If we dial this down a little bit, you can see we are saving a lot of weight, and you can see it's not linear, because as this goes down, all of the weight of the hull itself will go down, and the speed will go down as well. So that would be lovely. So we'd be saving a lot of money this way. On the other hand, we might also want to add some secondary guns. So let's actually add a couple of secondary guns. So caliber 2 might be okay. Let's add 10 guns, so 5 on each side in a casemate style configuration, so that means it's in the hull. You can pick other ones, but they are mostly stuff for the future, and then that means we have to dial up on the weight a little bit. We could build it like this, but it would mean it can take much less damage, as a little bit of damage already brings it down quite quickly. So let's dial this up, and again it's not linear, but at 3,000 tons it would be fairly fine. So it might not be the best ship, but I think it would certainly get the job done. So I think I'm fairly fine with this ship actually. So yeah, let's save it. And we can build it, and again it will bring up the build dialog. We don't need quite as many of those, maybe let's say 4 for the moment, and maybe later on we're going to add more. And you can see we already have them here. Normally it takes some time to build these, but of course in the beginning of the game you might design them like such. So, lastly, let us design a battleship. Now in practice, in-game, you'll want a lot more ships. You'll want a heavy cruiser that can defeat light cruisers. You might want to get a light cruiser that can go raiding, so it's very fast, long range. The exact opposite of these destroyers with their crammed and short-ranged accommodations. Probably also a reliable engine so that doesn't break down in the middle of nowhere. But For our purposes, we are going to design a battleship. Now, as you can see, there are a lot of different types. We are going to go for the pre-Dreadnought battleship. That is what we can build in 1900, and it's going to be quickly it's going to be quickly obsolete. And we're going to use the auto design ship feature over here. So this, if you hit this, the game will automatically design a ship for you. That of course does take quite a bit of the fun out of it, but it does give you sometimes a very good pointer. If you have absolutely no idea, this is a good thing to hit, and then you can go through this design, and that's what we're going to do now. So the first thing to realize here is that the Richelieu class does have a displacement of 16,000 tons, and that's the maximum we can build. Our dock size does allow for 16,000 ton ships, so that's a fairly good first thing. You almost all the time want to build as big ships as you can for your capital ships. Now, all in all, again, this ship is quickly going to be obsolete. You can see it have two turrets, one in the front and one in the aft, so with 2 guns per turret, 4 guns in total, 4 capital guns of 12-inch caliber shells. And that is certainly an interesting proposal, and that is very typical of the battleships of the time. The idea was that you had these main guns, but you also had a lot of secondary guns, the idea was that these secondary guns would light the other ship on fire, damage the superstructure, damage the soft components, and these here would really be the heavy hitters. But ultimately it turned out that it was possible to fight at much longer ranges. The Battle of Tsushima Strait, of course, was a very famous example for that, and people did start to put more more main guns on the wings, in the center line and all of that. But that is something that goes a little bit beyond the 1900s. For now we're going to look at this design and just gradually improve on it. You can see we could try to do something over here, starboard aft, let's say these two, and it would probably be, if we remove the aft turret here, it would probably be considered illegal. And it's not, interestingly enough. Would it really not be considered illegal? No, see, it would be a different ship type. So yeah, we are going to delete these turrets here, and we're going to reintroduce the aft turret as a double turret. You can of course include triple turrets and quadruple turrets if your technology allows. That's not the case right now. So first of all, let's check whether everything is okay, and we get a note immediately here saying that the rate of fire for secondary guns is reduced by 40% because we don't have the technology for turrets. So that's a little bit weird design choice of the game over here, because ultimately we have these secondary guns, 6-inch caliber guns here in gun turrets, and that's not something that is possible. So we could do them in turrets of 1, and I think that would at least reduce the firepower penalty over here. But we're indeed going to use them in casemates, so basically in the ship hull itself, and I think that's perfectly fine. Yeah, so that's alright, but now the ship is slightly overweight. Not by much, mind you, it's only 32 tons on a displacement of 16,000 tons, but to me that's more or less fine. So let's look at the main guns. They're 12-inch caliber. We could do more. Notice how the weight of this is going to increase dramatically, so 10% more. We could do less, it's fine. But you see that the quality goes down as we enter 13 inches. And we don't have really better quality, so I think 12-inch is a very reasonable choice, so we're going to keep it at that. I would ideally like a little bit more rounds per gun, so 100 rounds I think is reasonable. Notice, by the way, that the ammo weight is 400 tons already, so that's nearly as much in ammo as some of these destroyers are weighting in total. 2 firing range of 2 fire control positions is certainly fine with the central rangefinder. Ideally we'd also want to have some weight remaining over here so that we can upgrade that. But we don't have that now. 16 guns, maybe we'll have to dial down on this. It would be great to get some tertiary guns to ward off destroyers, but we don't really have that for now. What the game typically does, and it was done historically, is use torpedoes. And I hate this. I think it's a very, very stupid idea to try and use torpedoes on main capital ships. You might do something different. We are going to remove all of these here at the same time, and that is certainly going to save some weight. It's also going to remove a very vulnerable position in the ship from being there, because of course that position in the hull is a little bit weaker, and it's just an invitation for fires to get started. Right, so all in all I'm fairly fine with the weaponry, with the other things over here, so there's basically nothing over here. So let's look at the other things over here on the left side. Maximum displacement, we can't do more, so we can't dial this up to get rid of this, so maybe we have to have a look over here. I think a normal freeboard, medium range, normal engine priority is fine for France. In other countries you could do it differently. We could dial down on the speed, that would massively save us some weight. But I think 19 tons would also be nice. Notice just how much of the cost that is, 7 million out of a total of 53. So yeah, it's fairly expensive. And we do have a lot of armor. So armor, you can see, does take up a lot of the weight. In total, it's 33% for the armor. Total armor is 5,000 tons. Armament, so this stuff here, is 4,000 tons. Accommodation is 400. So yes, I think it would make complete sense to rethink our armor layout here a little bit. So let's look at the gun data, and you can see that even at very short ranges, these guns are only capable of penetrating 6.5 inches or so of belt armor, and deck armor of, even at very long ranges, of only about an inch. So as the range gets longer, sort of the trajectory of the shells becomes more parabolic, and that means they're coming in a little bit more from above rather than the side, and that means the deck armor is used for this. So in truth, we'd only need about 6 inches of belt armor. We currently have 10, so you know what, we might dial this down a little bit. We also note that the conning tower, so the bridge, has pretty much the same armor as belt, as do the turrets, and I think that's a very bad practice. So let's dial this down a little bit, I think to 8. That should be okay. Deck armor, we might also want to dial this down at least a little bit. This is an enormous amount of weight over here. And that does allow us to do some things a little bit differently. Primarily, I think the conning tower should receive better armament. Turrets is fine, so 10 inches of turret armament I think is good. Our turret tops we could do with a little bit less potentially, so that does reduce the weight also. That already saved 900 tons. Secondaries are fine, but I think the extended belt should go up a little bit, so that at the very least, you know, we are also not going to be penetrated on the belt, so this here would actually be a fairly good choice. And if you see on gun range, you can see that this ship has an immunity zone of 5,000 yards to 11,000 yards against its own gun, so that does give you a very good indication of what the usefulness of this ship would be. Right, so that does leave us with about 500 tons, which is great because we can of course use that in other things. We can try to dial this up. Let's check. It would be okay. So indeed we might want to use more secondary guns here. It's considerably overweight now, so that was maybe defeating the purpose a little bit, but 20 guns is fine. But this weight, maybe we want to keep a little bit more for safety margin here to upgrade these things over time. But this would be a completely legal ship, and you know what, it's not going to be the best ship, but these things are going to be obsolete extremely quickly anyway. So you know what, I am going to be fine with this. We are going to save this. We're of course going to build a couple of those, let's say 4, and that should be fine. Now again, this is by far not a complete setup, but you can see some of these guys are very, the displacement here, these basically weigh 30 times as much as a destroyer, so the destroyer is much more disposable. They are basically your heavy hitters. These guys are basically your light cavalry, and these guys are basically your skirmishers. So I hope that this little tutorial here helped you understand the design interface a little bit more. If you do have questions, do post them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't expect these to be the best ship designs that you've ever seen. It was mainly here to talk about the interface. I encourage you to have a look at some of the Let's Plays, some of mine, but also other people, certainly like Torpedo or the Historical Gamer, do have very good Let's Plays, so do look at them for more inspiration for ship designs. And I hope you enjoy the game. We're going to continue with some further tutorials in this series, but for now, that's it. So do leave a like and comments and all of that. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.